the history of Pride. I was one of about 40 people who organised and publicised the first ever UK Pride Parade, which took place in London on the 1st of July, 1972. It had never been done before. We were mostly members of the not long formed Gay Liberation Front, and we thought, well, we need to do something to counter the idea that gay is shameful. So what better than to respond to the accusations that we were sinners, criminals, immoral, unnatural, than to assert our pride in who we are. So that's how the idea of LGBT pride originated. It was a riposte to those who said, you should be ashamed. And we organized this first march, having no idea how many people would turn up or what kind of reception we'd get from the public or the police. But we knew, of course, that still most aspects of gay male life were criminalized in 1972 and for many years later. So we weren't expecting a particularly friendly response from the police. I think that fear of police reaction deterred a lot of people from coming. But in the end, about 700, maybe 1,000 people at the tops, turned out for that first ever UK Pride Parade. And we were very, very nervous because most of us had the status still of unapprehended criminals, because most aspects of gay male life were still against the law, although there'd been a partial decriminalization in 1967. But in the years afterwards, the police harassment and victimization of the community increased by 400%. So you had partial decriminalization in 1967, and the response of the state was to intensify the arrests and convictions of gay and bisexual men. They went up by over 400% in the period 1967 to 74. A huge escalation in anti-gay repression. So anyway, we turned up, 700 to 1,000 of us. We were very surprised by the responses. As we marched through the streets, from Trafalgar Square to Hyde Park, we were expecting hostility. And indeed, I would say that about a third of all the public on the streets that day did greet us with very hostile, negative, abusive responses. They shouted out various insults, puffs, queer, faggot, benders. Some threw coins and bottles, glasses at us. And then there was another third who were just curious. They stared at us in disbelief that a gay person would dare show their face in public. Many of them, their eyes were like fixated, and they were gulping, I suppose is the correct word, to summarize their response. But then there was another third who were actually supportive. About a third of people actually said, good on you, well done, I support you, gave us a thumbs up. Some even clapped and cheered. So that was quite surprising, because we didn't expect in 1972 a third of the public in the streets of central London to be supportive. And it showed us that we had obstacles and mountains to climb, but there was a reservoir or a base of public opinion which was sympathetic, if not on our side. From 1972 onwards, that gave us the emboldenment to carry on. And so each successive year, there was another Pride Parade. And each year, they began to get slowly, and I emphasize slowly, bigger and bigger. A lot of people, of course, were probably deterred by the fact that on that first Pride Parade, there was roughly one police officer for every marcher. And we were hemmed in by the police. They sometimes shoved us. Some of them abused us as puffs, queers, faggots, benders. So when the word got out about that, quite a lot of people thought, oh, we're not going to attend the next one if that's what's going to happen. No one was actually arrested, but it was certainly a very hostile police atmosphere. But so that's the reason why I think for the first few years, the numbers grew very, very slowly. And in fact, it wasn't until the 1980s, with the advent of Ken Livingstone's Greater London Council, which was the first major authority in the country to support LGBT communities. Ken Livingstone opened the doors of County Hall to LGBT groups where you could meet there. He set up a working party to set out a program for improving the rights and freedoms of LGBT people. He also helped fund, or did fund, LGBT groups. That had never, ever happened before. And that sort of gave our community a big psychological boost. We felt that here was a straight politician, a left-wing Labour-controlled council that was actually supporting us. It had never, ever happened before. And from that time onwards, then Pride parades began to get gradually bigger. But even as late as 1987, the maximum number of people on a London Pride parade was 15,000. 15,000. Not great. But then came Section 28. In 1988, the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher legislated Section 28, which prohibited local authorities, that's local councils, local health authorities, local education authorities, from the so-called promotion of homosexuality, which in effect meant any kind of positive, affirmative support for LGBT kids in schools, support for LGBT people in the health service, support for LGBT people in communities. And again, what happened was the reversal of what Ken Livingstone began. We suddenly found local authorities cutting funding from LGBT groups, refusing to allow LGBT groups to meet on council properties, like local libraries or community halls. Some schools took LGBT books out of the library. So there weren't many books in those days, but there were an occasional book by Oscar Wilde or some other gay author. They were removed from school libraries. Plans to host plays with gay characters were shelved. Teachers told LGBT kids, sorry, I can't discuss that. So they got no support, no help, no affirmation about their sexuality or their gender identity. But with Section 28 came the rebirth or the reinvigoration or perhaps the birth of the LGBT plus community in this country. For the first time, all the different LGBT groups began working together. And for the first time, both the lesbian and gay male movements worked together. Because there'd been quite a big split from the 70s where lesbian women had split off from the main LGBT groups and formed their own organizations. But Section 28 brought us all together. And the reason was twofold. First of all, Section 28 in 1988 was the first new anti-gay law in Britain for nearly a century. It was also the first law to affect lesbians. So that gave us a real strength of purpose and a real reason to unite. So the Pride Parade in 1988 suddenly jumped in numbers from 15,000 to 30,000. And then every year afterwards kept on growing and growing and growing. The acme was, I guess, 1997. In 1997, there were well over 100,000 people on the London Pride Parade. Well over 100,000. It took almost 6 hours for the parade to pass any single point on the route. Almost 6 hours. And then the festival afterwards on Clapham Common had a record 300,000 people. That was quite astonishing. But then sadly, the Pride Committee, which was all volunteer, as it is today, the Pride Committee, having hosted this huge event, not surprisingly, hadn't expected the numbers, and they lost £60,000. They had a £60,000 deficit. So there was a huge hue and cry by certain people to demand the Pride Committee be sacked because they were incompetent. I think that was very, very unfair. They were very competent. They did lose some money, but on the basis of a huge, huge march and festival, which they could have easily recouped the next year. Anyway, the pressure was so great in the LGBT press and among particularly gay business people that the committee was forced to stand down. And then gay businesses took it over and rebranded it as Mardi Gras to not be a community event, but to be primarily a fee-paying festival. And that's when things went way down the pan. I mean, the numbers plummeted on the march and the festival. And that remained in place for about 4 or 5 years until eventually community groups reclaimed it. And then it began to rebuild again until we have what we have today. But as you all probably know, that even on this Saturday, it's not going to be anywhere near 100,000. The city of Westminster City Council, the Metropolitan Police, and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, have stipulated that the maximum number of people allowed to march on Saturday is 30,000. That is pathetic. That's outrageous. To cap a community event, to say that thousands of people will not be allowed to march, and I just heard it from the Pride Committee this afternoon, that they had to turn away over 20,000 people who want to march. And this is a part of the bureaucratization and, I suppose, the way in which the whole Pride is being co-opted by city authorities increasingly, not just in London, but all over Britain and all over the world. There's plenty of space there for all kinds of organizations, but really, Pride should be a place for everyone who wants to participate, and it's not going to be, sadly. Many people will, of course, spectate. They will watch from the streets. That's great. But I think it's a real pity that, London is not living up to its potential. I was in Dublin last Saturday for their Pride Parade. Dublin has 1 million people. London has nearly 8 million. Dublin, with 1 million people, had 60,000 people on their Pride Parade. Yet on Saturday, we're only going to have 30,000. London is one of the smallest Pride parades in the Western world. I mean, even small countries have bigger parades than we do. So something's seriously gone wrong. And I think the community needs to say loud and clear that we want our Pride back. Pride should be for everyone. Everybody who wants to march should be able to march. If you're one of the people who won't be able to march, my advice to you is just wait till the end of the parade comes and then join in at the end. I doubt they'll